Tonight we're discussing ancient Egypt, and there's a lot to discuss when you talk about Bible history and ancient Egypt. All right, so the first thing I want to discuss is here in the book of Genesis. We're going to start with 10, and we're just going to start where the Egyptians come from, then we'll go from there. All right, so this is Genesis 10. All right, and you're in the sons of Ham. All right, so this is Genesis 10, starting with verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan. So the Egyptians, the ethnic Egyptians, come from Mizraim, the son of Ham. All right, so that would make them Africans, right? But as you will notice, when we go through these Egyptian dynasties, you will see that a lot of different people came in and conquered the land of Egypt. All right. So jumping down, actually from there, we don't need to read all the different families of Egyptians. That's what it goes into in verse 13. Even though it does mention that the Philistines come out of the Egyptians as well, but we're just going to get to a different point throughout Egypt's history as they were on the rise. All right, so this is Genesis 12 with the forefather Abraham. Before his name was changed to Abraham, it was Abram. All right, so I'm gonna start with verse 10. Genesis 12 and verse 10. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. So I just want to mention this history because if you read in the books of Flavius Josephus, which isn't canon to the scriptures, it's not biblical, but it is just written by a Jewish historian explaining some historical facts about the Jews and the history of the Jews, the forefathers of the Israelites, like Abraham here. All right, and he mentions in his works, if you read it, that the Egyptians didn't really understand much about astronomy, geography. From Genesis 12, we're going to Genesis 41 to talk about the history with Joseph and Egypt. We talked about how Egypt did not start to become prominent as an empire in the world until after Abraham's first visit, which could have been either the 15th dynasty with the Hyksos or shortly after in the 16th dynasty. It's 41. And I'm just going to jump down to the interpretation of the dreams, because the dreams themselves don't really matter concerning this history. All right, so we're just going to jump down into the history itself. All right, so this is Genesis 41, and I'm starting with 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. All right, so Joseph was in prison because of false rape allegations. All right, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou can understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. All right, so you see that right there. So give all praises to the Most High, even in your gifts and all things that you can do. All right. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored, and lean flesh, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt, for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. So I awoke. So you got 7 healthy-looking cattle, and then here come these ugly and disease-ridden cattle. These famished, these starving-looking cattle eat them up, right? But they still look starving and diseased. All right? Verse 22. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. Right, because I do want to take note of this where it says, I told this unto the magicians. Because every people, every culture has their own religion and has their own priests, right? But Pharaoh said, look, I brought it to my priests, I brought it to my holy men, and they couldn't tell it to me because they are not of God. But Joseph, he was of God, all right? And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears that blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. All right? So Joseph said there's going to be 7 good years, good plenteous years, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. All right? This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Because people have dreams all the time about what's going to happen, right? And it may be real, it may not be real. But this was something that was established by God, so he showed it to Pharaoh twice so he could get the point, all right? Now, therefore, let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. All right? So Joseph said, you set up a wise governor over the land of Egypt, and he will govern the proportions, right? And he will allow us to make it through those 7 famine years versus those good years, right? You ration out the good years and we'll make it through the famine years. All right, verse 37. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this? Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God has showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according to thy word shall all my people be ruled. Excuse me. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Right? So Pharaoh said, I'm going to make you this governor. All right? And verse 41. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. All right. So the ring of Pharaoh, like the ring of a king, is very important because you get to make things official, right? You would dip it in the wax, right? And that's how you know that it's something that it's officially from the king, if you have the signet from the ring. All right. And of course he dressed him nicely, gave him jewelry. Verse 43. And he made him to ride in the 2nd chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. All right. So this Pharaoh specifically, I'm not sure, but we know that this is after the Hyksos, and I'll show you that here in a second. But it would be in the, most likely be in the 16th, possibly the 17th dynasty. All right, it's either the Anat dynasty or the Rahotep dynasty. All right. So the reason why we know that this is the after the 15th dynasty, after the Hyksos dynasty, is we can go to Genesis. Okay, yes. So this is Genesis 47. When Joseph brought his family into Egypt, all right, he told them, tell the Egyptians that you are shepherds, because the Egyptians hate shepherds. Why would the Egyptians hate shepherds? Because the Hyksos were shepherd kings. All right, they come and they destroyed the land, took it over, and that was the 15th dynasty of Egypt. That's one thing that you will notice when you look through the dynasties of Egypt, that it was constantly a struggle between the ethnic Egyptians, the Mizraimites, and the Cushites from the south would come and take kingdoms, would take dynasties rather, and the Hyksos from the north would come to take dynasties, and even later in the future we will see Nebuchadnezzar come in, and then the Persians and the Medes came in, and then the Greeks and Romans, so on and so forth. All right. So I'm going to start with Genesis 47 and verse 1. Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Right, so at this point in time, you had famine throughout all of that Middle Eastern area, right? Middle East and North Africa. And the Egyptians were the only ones able to capitalize during that, because they had the wisdom of Joseph to guide them through, right? The Lord had showed them the way and brought them to prominence, right? So all the other lands have to come to Egypt now for food, all right? I do want to read this point in Genesis 46, the reason why they told Pharaoh that they were shepherds. Because as we just read in Genesis 47, they told him, hey, we're shepherds. That's what we do for our job. All right. So this is Genesis 46 and verse 33 I'm going to start with. And it shall come to pass when Pharaoh shall call you and shall say, what is your occupation? That ye shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth even until now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And this was because they had that history of dealing with the Hyksos, which were, again, shepherd kings. All right, that was their occupation as well. So Joseph knew that history, therefore this must have been after the Hyksos dynasty. You understand where I'm coming from? This must be either the 16th or 17th dynasty. All right. So we got that history with Abraham and Joseph about how the Egyptians came to prominence through the wisdom of our forefathers. All right. So from there, I do want to reiterate this point that I read last week in Psalms 105. About the rise of Egypt, just to sum it up, and then we can move forward. This is Psalms 105. This is verse 17. Actually, I'm going to start with 16. This is Psalms 105 and verse 16. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread, right? So that was the whole land, that whole region of the Middle East and North Africa. He sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant, because that's how Joseph originally entered into Egypt. His brethren sold him for a servant, whose feet they hurt with fetters. He was laid in iron, until the time that his word came. The word of the Lord tried him, right? The Lord had to prove Joseph to be a man of God, as Joseph was. He passed that test, so to speak. All right. Verse 20. The king sent and loosed him, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his substance. We just read that in Genesis. To bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom, right? So teach his senators how to govern the land properly. All right. To bind his, I just read that. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham, right? So all of Israel moved into Egypt at that time, if you read Genesis 47. And he increased his people greatly and made them stronger than their enemies, right? So here we see Israel's growing in the land, becoming prosperous, and we're about to read that in Exodus 1, all right? He turned their heart to hate his people, to deal subtly with his servants. Again, we're about to read that in Genesis 1. But let's go back to the dynasties page, all right? So, I do want to get that Exodus 1, and we're going to read that alongside this dynasties page. All right? So we just read about how the whole family of Israel moved into Egypt, all right? And they grow and they populated there, and the Egyptians began to hate them, all right? So this is the dynasties of ancient Egypt. It goes from the 16th and 17th. Either of those could have been the one where the Pharaoh concerning Joseph was, or lived rather. And then you have the new kingdom that was established, and that is the 18th dynasty. That is primarily where the Israelite years were, where Israelites were in captivity, was the 18th dynasty. What is known as the new kingdom, the beginning of the new kingdom. All right, so this is Exodus 1. So it's talking about Israel coming into Egypt. I'm going to start with verse 6. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. So originally, it was just the land of Goshen, right? The land of Goshen being basically the where the Nile River empties into the Mediterranean. That's the land of Goshen. That's originally where the Israelites were. But as you see here, the Israelites became fruitful, and the Israelites started moving out and going through all the different lands of Egypt and doing trade all over Egypt, and become prosperous within the land of Egypt. All right. So this is verse 8. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. So this new king isn't just talking about one Pharaoh. It's talking about the new kingdom that came after all that generation of Joseph and those Egyptians who were dealing what's the word I'm looking for? Just nicely and generously with Joseph. Verse 9. And he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they... All right, we're back. We're back. Let's see. All praises to the Most High. It seems that we're back. We're back moving. They said the frame rate's pretty low. It should be good now, though. I think it's just the internet connection I got here. All right. So, let's go back. And this is the end of verse 11. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. All right, so this is Exodus 1. I just read verse 11. Pithom and Ramses is known as the Valley of the Kings. All right, that's what that's going into. The Israelites built the Valley of the Kings. Those, the Great Pyramid and those surrounding it, those were not built by the Israelites. All right, there were some pyramids. There's a lot of pyramids throughout Egypt. A lot of them were built by Israelites, but not the ones in Giza. All right, the Sphinx was not built by the Israelites. The Valley of the Kings, that's what was built by the Israelites, and other cities. All right, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. Verse 13, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. All right. So this is going into the slavery of the Israelites in Egypt. As the Israelites multiplied there, Pharaoh and the Egyptians began to hate and fear the Israelites amongst them. All right. Verse 15. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah and the other Puah. And he said, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men, children alive. So, basically what the Pharaoh is telling them, he's saying, kill these babies, kill these male babies, all right? Because he understood that the man carries the seed. So if it was just female babies left, then he could further the seed of the Egyptians, of the ethnic Egyptians. Let's see what these Hebrew women do. Let's see what Shiphrah and Puah do. And the king, in verse 18, and the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered, or the midwives come in unto them. Right? So, these women lied to the Pharaoh to save the Israelite men and not, genocide them. That's what Pharaoh is trying to do here. He's trying to wipe out the Israelites. All right. Verse 20. Therefore God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. Right. So Shiphrah and Puah, all praises to the Most High for those sisters for doing what they did. If not, there would be no Israelites today. They would be wiped out. All right. Verse 22. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. So he went above their heads. In other words, he said, I'm just going to make this decree that y'all kill all the male babies of the Israelites. Again, to wipe out the seed of Israel and to further the seed of the ethnic Egyptians. All right. So from here, we have Moses. So I'm going to go back to, I should have kept this tab up with Psalms 105. Psalms 105, and what verse did we go to? This was verse 26. Actually, I'm going to start with 24 because I'm going to recap this history again, as Psalms 105 does. Verse 24. And he increased his people greatly and made them stronger than their enemies. He turned their heart to hate his people, to deal subtly with his servants. All right. The Egyptians began to hate the Israelites and his servants. He sent Moses, his servant, and Aaron, whom he had chosen. Right. So God chose Moses and Aaron to deliver the Israelites from that captivity. All right. Verse 27, they showed his signs among them and wonders in the land of Ham. He sent darkness and made it dark, and they rebelled not against his word. All right. There's different plagues. These are the different plagues that he brought upon the Egyptians. All right. So with that, I do want to go ahead and pull up the point of these plagues. In Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12, I believe it's verse 12. Let me take a look. Yes. All right. So this is Exodus 12 and verse 12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. So the whole point of each and every plague was to show, oh, y'all have a god of cattle. Well, I'm going to send this disease on all your cattle, right? You have a god of your Nile River. I'm going to make it blood. You see that right there? So you have a god of the sun. I'm going to make it dark throughout all your land. That's what God did. He said, look, your gods are not real. Those Egyptian gods are not real. The Lord is the only one and true God. The God of Israel is the only one that's real. So that was the whole point of the 10 plagues, was to show, look, your pagan deities, they are not real. Your idols, they are fake. They are phony. And I am the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. All right. The God of Moses and Aaron. All right. So I'm not going to get into each and every different God, but you get the point. All right. The whole point is to show that those gods don't exist and the Lord is the only one and true God. All right. This is Numbers 33 and verse 3. And they departed from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month. On the morrow after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with a high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians. Right. So the Israelites left during the reign of Ramses the Great. All right. And if you read in the dynasties of ancient Egypt, that is the 19th dynasty. All right. Ramses the Second, also known as Ramses the Great, is the one that we left from under, the son of Seti the First. All right. That was in the 19th dynasty. All right. So from there, we don't read too much of Egypt until we start getting to, let's say, Shishak, for example, and then we get into Necho. But I do want to make this point real quick in Romans, the 9th chapter. This is heavy right here. And this will allow you to understand why the world is the way that it is today. All right? This is Romans 9. And I'm going to jump down to 15. For he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. Right? So if you're chosen, there's nothing you can do to be unchosen, and if you're not chosen, there's nothing you can do to be chosen. Like if you read the book of Jonah. Jonah was swallowed by the whale because he ran away from God's calling. God told him to go to Nineveh and prophesy against it, but Jonah said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to Tarshish instead. But there was a storm on the ship. The people threw him overboard, and then he got swallowed up. All right? And then God saved his life, and what happened? He continued his mission. He did what God told him to do in the first place. All right? You can try to run away, but there's nothing you can do to stop the will of God. All right? But of God that showeth mercy. Verse 17. For the scripture saith unto Pharaoh, even for the same purpose have I raised thee up, that I might show my power in thee, and that my name might be declared throughout all the earth. All right? So that's the only reason why God sent Abram and Joseph to the lands, or rather to the land of Egypt during those famines. Is so that he could raise Egypt up, so that he could show his power through destroying Egypt and their gods, quote unquote. All right. That's the whole reason. That's why there was at points where Pharaoh wanted to let the Israelites go, but God said, "No, I need 10 plagues." All right. He said he hardened his heart. All right. Verse 18, therefore he hath mercy on whom he will have mercy, and on whom he will he hardeneth. All right. And then verse 19 says, thou wilt then say to me, why doth he yet find fault? For who hath resisted his will? So you say, oh, well, why does he judge Pharaoh? Because God did it to Pharaoh. All right. Verse 20, nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? Right, so we can't speak against the creator like that. We are his creation. He can do whatever he wants to with his creation. All right? You don't have the authority to speak against the Lord. All right? God will do what he wants to with whoever he wants to do it to. And that's just and good. All right? So, from there, yeah, we can read a little bit about, like I said, I mentioned 2 names. I mentioned Shishak and I mentioned Necho. So let's read about that just a little bit, just touch and go on that. Shishak, not First Chronicles. It's in Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles. Let me look. Maybe 12, maybe 14. But during the days of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. And of course, here we go with this. Okay, here we go. This Second Chronicles, the 12th chapter. And it came to pass, when Rehoboam had established the kingdom and had strengthened himself, he forsook the law of the Lord, and all Israel with him. All right. And it came to pass that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, because they had transgressed against the Lord, with 1,200 chariots, with 70,000 horsemen, and the people were without number that came with him out of Egypt, the Lubims, the Sukkums, and the Ethiopians, right? So he gathered together even the Cushites, and they went and they came to Jerusalem. And he took the fenced cities which pertained to Judah, which pertained to Judah, and came to Jerusalem. Then came Shemaiah the prophet to Rehoboam and to the princes of Judah that were gathered together to Jerusalem because of Shishak, and said unto them, Thus saith the Lord, Ye have forsaken me, and therefore have I also left you in the hand of Shishak. Whereupon the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves, and they said, The Lord is righteous. All right. So, verse 7, and when the Lord saw that they humbled themselves, the word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, saying, They have humbled themselves, therefore I will not destroy them, but I will grant them some deliverance, and my wrath shall not be poured upon Jerusalem by the hand of Shishak. Right? So the Lord said, okay, I'm going to have mercy on Rehoboam and Israel at this time, Judah specifically, because they have humbled themselves. All right. Nevertheless, verse 8, nevertheless, they shall be his servants, that they may know my service and the service of the kingdoms of the countries. All right. Because at that time, Israel had, gotten themselves a kingdom. There had been the king Saul, King David, and King Solomon. So Israel was sitting nice, sitting lovely. They didn't know servitude. God said, okay, you're going to learn to serve. All right, verse 9. So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem and took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took all. He carried away also the shields of gold which Solomon had made, instead of which King Rehoboam made shields of brass, and committed them to the hands of the chief of the guard that kept the entrance of the king's house. All right. So we see right there that there was already a decline in the wealth that was in Israel because of the tax that was paid to Shishak. All right. Now let's see if I can find Shishak in this dynasties real quick. That would have to be on down. Probably in the 22nd dynasty. I'm just looking at years here, but that may be off. Yeah, it's looking like maybe around in there. Yeah, the 21st dynasty is what it's looking like. It says Shoshank the first, also known as Shashank or Shishak, was a pharaoh of ancient Egypt and the founder of the 22nd dynasty of Egypt of Meshwesh ancestry. Shoshank the first was the son of Nimlot, great chief of the Ma, and his wife Tinshef, a daughter of the great chief of the Ma herself. Shoshank was thus the nephew of Osorkon the elder, a Meshwesh king of the 21st dynasty. He is generally presumed to be the Shishak mentioned in the Bible, and his exploits are carved on the Bubastite portal at Karnak. All right, so this is Shoshank the first. The Bible calls him Shishak most likely because of the transliteration between the Egyptian language and the Hebrew language. All right. So there we read about Shishak, where Egypt got one over on Israel, got one over on Judah, rather. All right. So from there, let's also read about it in the future. This is way down the line, hundreds of years down the line. Second Chronicles, maybe 34. Yes. Well, this is Josiah, the King Josiah. I actually want to read chapter 35, not chapter 34. That was where Josiah starts to reign. All right. Josiah was a righteous king. All right. He was crowned king at 8 years old, but he found the law of God at 16. Excuse me. And he repented and he kept the law of the Lord. All right. So he was a righteous king. So let's read here about his fall. This is 2 Chronicles 35, and I'm going to start with verse 20. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to fight against Carchemish by Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. But he sent ambassadors to him, saying, because the Lord was not going to come against Josiah. He was with Nebuchadnezzar. He had to wait till Josiah died. So that's why that happened. So this was probably, which dynasty this was? This could have been I believe this is the 26th dynasty. Wouldn't have been Samtik, but maybe one of his descendants. And actually, instead of verse 28, we're going to start with verse 29 and get to the point. The 2 Kings 23 and verse 29. In his days, meaning Josiah's days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates. Now, remember that about Assyria and Egypt's conflicts, all right? Because if you look at, if you look at Necho's father, Samtik. Let's go back to Samtik, the first. This is the beginning of the 26th dynasty. It says, he was installed by Ashurbanipal of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. You see that right there? So they had that relationship, all right, between Assyria and Egypt, all right? Basically, this 26th dynasty was just a puppet state for Assyria at the time, and they went back and forth, all right? So, but we're talking about Necho right now, the son of Samtik. And here we go with the technical difficulties again. Lord's will, all this would be better whenever we're not in this hotel. How's this looking over here? Yeah, everything looks fine over here. All praise to the Most High for that. So, back to the scriptures. 2 Kings 23 and 29. In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates. And King Josiah went against him, and he slew him at Megiddo when he had seen him. All right. So, Necho II killed King Josiah, king of Judah. All right. So, from there, in the same dynasty, all right, I believe it is Necho's grandson, because his son was Samtik II, and then his son was Aprahes, also known in the Bible as Hophra. All right, that's what it talks about here in Jeremiah 44. I'm going to start with verse 24, because you got to remember the history that was going on at the time. Nebuchadnezzar had already taken Jerusalem, right? Took all that land. All right. It was actually in the days of the son, or maybe even nephew of Josiah, Zedekiah. This is Jeremiah 44 and verse 24. Moreover, Jeremiah said unto all the people and to all the women, hear the word of the Lord, all Judah that are in the land of Egypt. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, saying, ye and your wives have both spoken with your mouths, and fulfilled with your hands, saying, we will surely perform our vows that we have vowed to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her. You will surely accomplish your vows, and surely perform your vows. Right. So, there were a lot of Israelites who fled Jerusalem when it was being taken by Nebuchadnezzar, and when it was being sieged, they fled from Jerusalem to Egypt. And God is saying, look, you're worshiping Isis down there, and you're worshiping these Egyptian gods. That's not going to save you. All right. Verse 26. Therefore hear ye the word of the Lord, all Judah that dwell in the land of Egypt. Behold, I have sworn by my great name, saith the Lord, that my name shall no more be named in the mouth of any man of Judah in all the land of Egypt, saying, the Lord God liveth. Behold, I will watch over them for evil and not for good. He said, look, since you decided to serve other gods, go ahead and serve them. I don't want you to say anything with my name in your mouth. All right? And all the men of Judah that are in the land of Egypt shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, until there be an end of them. He said, look, I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar and his army through there, and it's going to kill all the Israelites that's in Egypt. All right. Verse 28, yet a small number that escaped the sword shall return out of the land of Egypt into the land of Judah. And all the remnant of Judah that are gone into the land of Egypt to sojourn there shall know whose word shall stand, mine or theirs. All right. So he said, then you're going to know that I am the Lord. When this judgment comes upon you, then you're going to know that I am the Lord. All right. And this shall be a sign unto you, saith the Lord, that I will punish you in this place, that you may know that my word shall surely stand against you for evil. Verse 30. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will give Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, his enemy that sought his life. Right? So he's saying, I'm going to give Hophra into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. All right? Excuse me, pardon me. And this is the grandson of Necho that we were reading about. All right. So what we're reading about now is the fall of Egypt. All right. And you can look in the Egyptian dynasties. The 27th dynasty, actually, let's take a look. Pick the first again. Here's the dynasties, right? So after you have this 26th dynasty, that's the end of the dynasties in Egypt. All right. After that, they are ruled by the Babylonians, the Persians. All right. So let's get this judgment upon Egypt. All right. This is Ezekiel, the 29th chapter. So this is Ezekiel 29, talking about the desolation of Egypt, 29 and verse 8. It says, therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will bring a sword upon thee, and cut off man and beast out of thee. And the land of Egypt shall be desolate and waste. And they shall know that I am the Lord, because he has said, the river is mine, and I have made it. So that's what the pharaohs would say. They called themselves gods. They said, oh, I made the land of Egypt. It's similar to like Kim Jong-un, how he is today. As far as he calls himself like a god emperor, right? And tells these North Koreans to worship him. That's what the Egyptian pharaohs were like. All right. Behold, therefore I am against thee and against thy rivers, and I will make the land of Egypt utterly waste and desolate, from the tower of Syene even unto the border of Ethiopia. Right? So a lot of people, they think Egypt. I'm about to pull up a map right here. This is the Peters projection map. It's just a little bit more accurate than normal maps, than Mercator projection maps. So I'm just going to zoom in right here on Egypt, because what God said, from the Tower of Syene, that's up here in like Goshen, right? That's like Mediterranean type area. And a lot of people think Egypt stops right here where they've drawn this border, right? This lake right here. But really, Egypt goes all the way down to the borders of Ethiopia. That's like right in this region. The Nile goes all the way down here until it branches out. You see that? So that's why you see a lot, because even we kind of skipped over this when we was talking about Psamtik earlier, but he was at war with the Cushites, right? The Ethiopians. There was always this constant war between the Ethiopians and Egypt, right? And the previous dynasty, the 25th dynasty, was a Cushite dynasty, all right? So that's all of Egypt, right? From the Mediterranean down to the borders of Ethiopia. God said, I'm going to make all of that utterly waste and desolate. And that's why that's not a kingdom anymore. That's why that's not a ruling superpower in the earth anymore. All right. You don't hear about Egypt whenever you hear about these global superpowers. You hear about America. You hear about China, Russia, maybe even sometimes England and France. But you don't hear about Egypt no more. All right. Verse 11. No foot of man shall pass through it, nor foot of beast shall pass through it. Neither shall it be inhabited 40 years. All right. All right. because it talks about the desolation of Egypt for those 40 years during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 13. Yet thus saith the Lord God, at the end of 40 years will I gather the Egyptians from the people, whether they were scattered. All right, so the Egyptians aren't scattered among the nations anymore. That was a 40-year period. Verse 14. And I will bring again the captivity of Egypt, and will cause them to return into the land of Pathros. Right, Pathros was is modern day southern Egypt, northern Sudan. All right, that general area. All right, that's where Pathros is, into the land of their habitation, and they shall be there a base kingdom. All right, excuse me. And see, that's why they're not a superpower anymore. They're not a global superpower. They're not a kingdom anymore, because they're a base kingdom. That was prophecy, that God was going to leave them on the bottom. All right, because of all their sin, all the sins of the past. All right, because they proclaim themselves to be gods. God said, "You're nothing. I'm going to bring you down to nothing." All right, verse 15. It shall be the basest of the kingdoms, neither shall it exalt itself any more above the nations, for I will diminish them, that they shall no more rule over the nations. And it shall be no more the confidence of the house of Israel. Like what we was reading in Jeremiah 44. About how Judah, whenever it was being ransacked and sieged by Nebuchadnezzar, a lot of them ran into Egypt. All right. Which bringeth their iniquity to remembrance, right? Because Egypt didn't care what gods you worshipped, right? They didn't care about the sin that you was doing. Not like God does.